What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Michael and welcome back to Fudge Muppet. Today we're going to be looking through the melee weapon perks in Skyrim and talking about which ones are worth getting and which are worth absolutely avoiding. This of course involves both the one-handed perk tree and the two-handed one. I think you'll be surprised at some of the conclusions Scott and I have come up with. So straight off the bat, let's talk about the first perk in each tree. In one-handed it's called Armsman and in two-handed it's called Barbarian. Essentially all it is 5 ranks of a perk, each adding 20% more damage to their respective weapon type. This perk is a staple of all characters and is 100% worth getting for both perk trees. Next, we take a step up in both perk trees and we get to a perk called Fighting Stance in one-handed and Champion Stance in two-handed. These perks make power attacks cost 25% less stamina with their respective weapon types. This isn't the most amazing perk, but as a one-handed or two-handed character, they're also 100% worth getting because you need them to progress further up the perk tree. Consider it a necessity for that reason and enjoy the 25% reduction to power attack cost for whatever it's worth. Following this middle path of both trees upwards, we now arrive at a fork in the road. One way leads to 25% bonus damage to your standing power attack with a chance to decapitate, and the other grants you a sprinting power attack which does double critical damage. One of these perks is not worth it and the other is definitely a must-have. So the must-have perk here is the decapitation one. 25% more bonus damage on your standing power attack is very nice, and the chance to decapitate can often lead to finisher kills that you wouldn't have otherwise received. What I mean by this is that if your enemy had 150 health left and your power attack would only do 120 damage, including the bonus damage, sometimes it will just register a kill. I don't know why it does, but it just does. Even if this weren't the case, more power attack damage is great, especially as standing power attacks are often used, and decapitating enemies is seriously cool. Also, if you've watched some of our recent videos, you've probably heard me say that decapitated enemies can't be reanimated and brought back to life by necromancers. This adds to the coolness, but also is another neat advantage to take note of. Now, I'll tell you why the sprinting power attack isn't worth getting, but I do want to say that there aren't many perks out there that make you feel like more of a warmongering alpha than this. The sprinting power attack is incredibly awesome looking. However, there are two problems with it. Firstly, it's incredibly wasteful when it comes to stamina, as you need to use stamina to sprint and then also to power attack. But secondly, critical damage sucks because it works off base damage. So if you have a sword that theoretically has a base damage of 10 and you've used smithing and weapon perks to improve its damage all the way up to 130, the critical damage that gets added to it is based on the original base damage of 10. So it's hardly worth getting. Like I said though, if you just want the perk so you can do a sensational sprinting power attack, then go for it. This video is mainly for those who want to optimize their builds as much as possible. As you would have noticed so far, the one-handed and two-handed perks are pretty much exactly the same. However, before these trees reach their tallest perk, the two-handed tree has a perk in the way called Sweep. Sweep is a perk unique to two-handed which allows you to hit multiple enemies in one sideways power attack. This perk is very useful and definitely worth getting for two-handed builds. This is great against hordes of enemies, but you'll want to be careful with it around a companion as you could cause damage to them too. So Sweep is definitely a good perk. But what about this final top positioned perk in both one-handed and two-handed? In one-handed it's called Paralyzing Strike and in two-handed it's called War Master. What this does is give your backwards power attacks a 25% chance to paralyze their target. This perk is debatable. Personally, we don't get this perk because we think it's better used elsewhere, but it's one of those choices where ultimately I say it's up to you. A 1 in 4 chance to paralyze isn't bad, however, that's only if you're doing a backwards power attack. Also consider that in both one-handed and two-handed, you need to have a skill level of 100 to even get the perk. So by then, your enemies probably won't be a problem if you land a backwards power attack on them anyway. So get that perk if you want to, but don't get it if you want to be super nitpicky like we are in this video. I would use the perk point on something else. Dual wielding is another thing in the one-handed tree that is simply worth getting if you're going to be using one-handed and dual wielding your gear. It's unique to the one-handed tree. Dual wielding faster and with more damage is a huge advantage to get, and a pro tip is putting a light weapon like a dagger in your left hand, as the weight of this weapon determines the speed of your dual power attacks. This can make you very powerful, as I discussed in our starting warrior guide video. And finally, we have weapons specialization. These are the perks that let you specialize in either swords, war axes, or maces in one-handed, and great swords, battle axes, and war hammers in two-handed. The short answer is they're not worth getting, but here's why. Firstly, Bladesman and Deep Wounds. This involves 3 ranks to have a 20% chance of doing more critical damage with either swords or greatswords. The problem with this is the same as the Sprinting Power Attack perk. Critical damage comes from base damage, so the extra crit damage isn't very much. Next, we have Limb Splitter for battle axes and Hack and Slash for war axes. This gives you more bleeding damage with your weapons, and it's alright at the start of the game because you're a lower level, but at the end of the day, you're spending 3 perk points to only cause a little bit more damage. So Daedric weapons, for example, do 3 damage for 6 seconds, which adds up to 18 damage. However, by this stage, your weapon can do 100 damage anyway, and you can just quickly slash an enemy 3 times and they've taken 300 damage. They're just perks that are better spent elsewhere and only have a good impact early on. Finally, we have Bonebreaker for maces and Skull Crusher for warhammers. With all 3 ranks, this lets you ignore 75% of armor. This sounds pretty good, and it is good against some enemies. However, the problem with it is that heaps of enemies don't have an armor rating for you to ignore anyway. This means that it won't affect dragons and other big strong creatures, and even with other tough enemies like vampires who can wear some armor, they're not even wearing that much powerful armor, so the 75% you're negating won't make a significant difference. Again, early on this perk can be helpful because you fight lots of bandits, but as you level up, these enemies often stop leveling with you and are no longer a challenge. It's very rare that you find opponents who are a challenge later on who also wear armor that has a high armor rating. Maybe the Ebony Warrior, but besides him, ignoring 75% of armor rating simply isn't worth it. That said, many of these weapon specialization perks can be picked for role-playing purposes, but upon examination, spending 3 perk points for them is a bit excessive. Subscribe to Fudge Muppet for more videos like this. Thank you so much for watching it this far, and I really hope you enjoyed it. Social media links are in the description. My name is Michael, and I look forward to nerding out with you again very soon.